On Wednesday, I'm going to be taking the train from Olympia, Washington to Klamath Falls, Oregon. I'm going down to Klamath Falls because I have a friend who lives there. My great-grandfather is still alive and lives in Ashland, Oregon. And after I'm there on Thursday for a day, I'm going to then drive down with my friend to Davis, California for a Unitarian Universalist Young Adult Convention with my church and see some very good friends who live in California. So one thing I've made a video on before is about trains in general around the world. And one thing I'm interested in saying is having better access so I can travel easier, greener when I go around the world. And so more people can travel in ways that are less polluting than flying or driving. And for that, trains are the best way. And so in order to do that, I built this notebook. And what it does is it looks at, I examine city data. So I have a CSV I made, which has every city with over 1 million people in the world, and it basically has them in pairs. So Cairo and Giza both have over 1 million people each, and they're 7 kilometers apart, which isn't terribly interesting, but there you go. I divided it into three sub-spreadsheets. The local transit high-speed rail for 100 to 1,000 kilometers, and then also flying for over 1,000 kilometers, because that's not terribly used for flying. You kind of lose the time advantage, but it shows you that the HSR, high-speed rail document, those are places that are the best in the world, and while cutting out these small local routes that aren't terribly interesting. So what I did first is I said, okay, where are these cities in the world of over 1 million people? This is a graph that I made using Lightning, and my computer's being slow because I'm hearing something in the background. That's North America, and this map represents every city in the world which has over 1 million people. Australia, Asia, Europe, Africa, and the Americas. And so that's not terribly surprising, but so to start, what I did is I made this high-speed rail document, and here's the first 10 rows. These are the 10 city pairs in the world, which I generated by grabbing a spreadsheet of the population of every city by metropolitan area, which has, how you calculate is always going to be an issue, but I feel like this spreadsheet did a pretty good job. I'll share my data is on my GitLab, which I will link to in my doobly-doo down below, and I also found their latitude and longitude and said, okay, I can make this work. So Mumbai to Pune has the highest potential demand of anywhere in the world. And then you have Beijing, Dhaka, Tokyo. But then, of all the combinations between million-person cities in the world that have at least 100 kilometers distance between them, New York and Philadelphia is number 5 in the world in terms of the viability for high-speed rail. And while Tokyo and Osaka already have the Shinkansen, which it runs already, Beijing, Tianjin have high-speed rail already. And I hope someday that India will develop high-speed rail, but they have other issues that they need to deal with first. It makes it pretty clear to me that New York to Philadelphia is the #1 route in the world for building high-speed rail right now that will help reduce global warming emissions and make it so people will be more mobile when it comes to getting to job interviews, when it comes to visiting family, seeing friends, whatever people want to use it for. And help spur the economy by, increase the number of people who are able to travel. Of the 100 best routes for high-speed rail in the world, sorted by their power, so that's their population divided by distance, which I feel gives a pretty good metric, because we want cities that are very large and close together. That's where building high-speed rail line will be financially worth it. 25 of the best 100 are in India, and another 25 are in China. Then 8 each are in the United States, Japan, and South Korea. Now mind, a lot of these South Korean routes are with Japan and China, so it's not as good as it seems. Whereas the United States, these are within the US, and I'll have a map soon. And I have maps on here. And then if you look at it with the without limiting to the top 100, these are all good high-speed rail routes for 900 cities with 1 million people. China, India, the data speaks for itself. China is king, India is number 2, United States is clearly number 3. United States is an incredible country for potential, And within the same country, the data speaks for itself. And this is a map of the 100 routes in the world and where they are. So we have a cluster here for India, a cluster here for China, Japan, and Korea. A few European clusters, United States, South America, and Mexico there. Really makes it clear where we can build as a species and get some real benefits from this development. And so these are the best routes in the United States. I'm focusing on the United States because I live in Washington State, and that's where I live. So that's what I'm going to focus on. And so you see New York is king, and Los Angeles San Diego is very high. But New York is really where we can get the most bang per buck. But not only New York, Chicago, LA, Philadelphia. There are lots of cities pairs in the United States, San Francisco, Sacramento, that have a lot of potential for being in high demand. And then we have, this is without sorting by size. You have a lot of local routes. I'm not going to spend much time on this. But even without that filter for distance, New York to Philadelphia is still the third most powerful route in America. So we need to build high-speed rail there. And then you have a few, we'll get more like DC, Baltimore, technically the same metro area, and LA, San Diego is right there. So, and this sorted by populations multiplied together and then divided by distance. And this is the United States in the map. And these are only the 100 best routes in America and where these cities are located. So we have our California cluster, our New York, our Northeast, Texas, some Florida, and then the Northwest where I live. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and places where it's really valuable. And also what you can see is that there's really no distinction. Like this is Chicago here. There's no distinction between St. Louis, Indianapolis, actually. That's St. Louis, and that's Chicago. Meaning that there's really no distinction between the Midwest and Northeast because it's built up through this area, which is what this map shows. This whole area needs to be connected fully, which is kind of interesting and not something most people think of, because we think of them as totally separate. But the mathematics is saying population-wise, they're not. Population-wise, this whole Northeast through the Midwest, all the way to St. Louis, Missouri, is very good, is of the top 100 routes in America. The built high-speed rail includes all of those cities. Within the same country, and this is a quick little exploration into which city pairs are far apart in the same country, and the United States dominates the list because unlike China, where like Northeast China, you have Urumqi, but not many other cities, and a huge swath of that is very underpopulated. Most of Chinese population is in the east. The U.S. has large cities in all four corners, which means we have the United States dominate the list in terms of long distances between cities of the same country. That's really all I can take out of that. Of the best flying routes in the world. Quick side note, Tokyo is absolutely dominant. Tokyo to Korea and China. And then you finally get an American route here. India. But Tokyo is really the most valuable place to fly into and out of in the world. This map makes that abundantly clear because of China. And then using the world, there are 85 light rail routes, so local, 3,000. We're looking at 3,000 high-speed rail routes and 69,000 routes which are for flying between countries. So these are your potential that airlines could explore, of saying which ones are really worth flying through. It's a good place to start. Within the United States, the same data for 115 routes. These are the best flights in the United States. Chicago to New York, New York, New York, New York, then Chicago. But again, this makes sense because New York is huge, and LA and Chicago, we'll eventually get to another city. There's Houston. Point being, those three cities carry a lot of economic weight, and we can see that by their population here. None of our flights are in the same province, the same state in the United States. They're all, I had to choose the same word for the whole country, just chose one. there are no state intrastate routes over 1,000 kilometers because none of our states are that geographically large. That's proof. And then but there are a number of really good high-speed rail routes which will be under state jurisdiction, like LA San Diego, Houston Dallas, LA San Francisco, which are really good routes. As I showed in the top 100 above, a lot of these are within the same state and goes on the list. Of the high-speed rail routes, 26 are in the same state. Most of them are in California, but we also have a few in Texas, Florida, and then one each in Ohio and Pennsylvania, in terms of places where a state can build a high-speed rail route between million-person cities. These are the local routes, best local routes in the United States between giant cities. No real surprises here. It speaks for itself. I'm not going to read through that. This is a function I made for building graphs. And so just quick exploration of other countries, not be terribly America-centric, though I already have been. These are Canadian cities. They don't have very many cities with over 1 million people to start, and you find that Toronto dominates the list. But Canada doesn't have very many cities. Within Germany, it's a lot more diverse. You have Frankfurt, Stuttgart, and Berlin. And Munich will be in here somewhere as well, of course. And this is all... Where is Munich? There's Munich. Munich to Essen. But that's interesting how... Oh, that's the... fascinating. Oh yeah, because Munich's smaller than the others. I have family in Munich. In Australia, Sydney and Melbourne, Brisbane and Perth. Perth is the bottom of the list, and then Southeast Australia, and they're only million-person cities, not a very big country by population. India, however, is king. You find that Delhi is huge, but also you've got Kolkata and Mumbai, and then Bangalore, Kanpur. I mean, economically, India is, low income, but it has so much potential for infrastructure growth in between major cities. And the only other country that compares is China, which has already built a good chunk of it already. So that's, I could make an entire episode just about India, as this data shows. But I want to get through it before too long. So this is just for interest in Cape Town, because it's a very isolated city. You can see it's mostly South Africa, but then Kinshasa pulls a lot of weight, and then Sao Paulo. Because Sao Paulo is huge, that even across the Atlantic Ocean, it comes in near the top of Cape Town's list. Also, the fact there aren't that many million-person cities in Africa, but there are a good number. But Sao Paulo is a very important hub in the world, and this basically shows that. And it'll be clear, a little more in the United States. These are the American cities which have high-speed rail routes ready to go. That are ready to be built. We just need to fund them, and people will use them. And because over 1 million people, there will be demand. There is demand for all of those. And then North America, we find that Mexico City comes in number 1, followed by New York. This is just for high-speed rail, and because I sorted this by power 2. I believe, which is populations multiplied by each other. And you see that New York, Mexico City, LA, no surprises here. So that's a basic summary of 15 minutes of what does the world look like for high-speed rail. And I hope I've impressed to you that pretty much every city in the world, from the graph above and all across the United States, are great routes for high-speed rail in the world today. Now, this is a question of how many cities are there that are really isolated from other ones that are bigger than it. This is most useful with larger data sets, but this is just for interest by isolation from closest larger city. And it shouldn't be terribly surprising, but it's not a strict population map, because Sydney is only 4 million people, but it's so isolated that Jakarta is its closest larger. It's the 4th most isolated city in the world by its closest larger city. This is not terribly useful though for high-speed rail, but I'm not going to spend much time on this. Tokyo is king, followed by Delhi because of India, China, Mexico, no surprises there. And South Korea has a number of big cities, so Seoul pulls itself up pretty quick. And then Los Angeles is closer to Mexico City, not New York City, which kind of makes sense when you look at the map, but it also means I thought that was an interesting tidbit. And in the United States, 29 of our million cities are closest to another American city that's bigger than it. 3 are in Mexico, including LA, and 1 is in Canada, which is probably Rochester or Buffalo to Toronto. This is like, I'm not going to spend time on that. Just countries, and the number of cities they have in the closest larger category. Just some data. Closest larger United States sorted by distance. So New York, LA. The interesting thing about this is it says, we look at our distance here. We have our states here. So we have New York is obviously the furthest, then California, Florida, Texas, Illinois, Chicago, Illinois, and Seattle, Washington. And every other city in the United States is less than 1,000 kilometers from a larger city to it, with the exception of Seattle, Chicago, Dallas, Houston, Miami, LA, and New York City. Those are the only cities in the United States that are more than 1,000 kilometers from a city larger than itself. That's the list. So if you think that, the United States, we're all so spread apart, yeah, we have a few main hubs, but we are clustered. We're just not all in one cluster because of American geography. So this totally changed the way I see the world. So this is a cluster map that function I scrolled past earlier. Clusters them by color. So here's Seattle and Vancouver. Every city that's less than 200 kilometers from another. You see a Chinese cluster forming, some in India, but this would be less than an hour train ride. But it shows you that you still have some pretty impressive clusters forming in China, in the northeast of the United States, and a few others. If we expand it to 300 kilometers, all of East Asia almost is all in one cluster. And all of these cities have at least 1 million people. The Northeast hasn't fully formed yet. The Northwest has. North and South California are separated at 300 kilometers distance. Shows you how big California is. But 300 kilometers is only an hour train ride, so that's really not that far. Here's Germany. Here is Malaysia. Java has incredible potential. And interestingly, northern India, which speaks Indo-Aryan, and southern India, which speaks Dravidian, are separate. There's this area where there are no million-person cities between the two. And that's something you won't necessarily get looking at other ways of looking at India. But I think that's important. And then saying a 400-kilometer radius, you really start to see some big network clusters. The northeast United States, from Chicago east, is all one giant cluster. California still hasn't formed one, yet China and Japan is all one cluster. So is India. Here is the Middle East. You have an impressive cluster here, and Istanbul down to Jerusalem. Western Europe, you have a belt here and a belt in Eastern Europe that are not the same, by the way. Brazil is formed into one. Here is Argentina. You have a lot of, the point being, on the cluster I mentioned earlier, you have so many clusters of places in the world where cities are together in a way that makes it viable to build high-speed rail. And so, sorted by distance, and here we are. This is a graph of cities, distance on a histogram. It shows you that most cities, the distribution, the data speaks for itself. I don't need to say more. The final question I asked in this video, and this is the last part, is asking which cities are the furthest from other cities with over 1 million people. So how many cities would high-speed rail really not be viable? It's using our 1,000-kilometer cutoff. So with the assumption that you would need 1 million people. So I figured that out in this function. Perth is 2,774 kilometers from the nearest larger city. Then Antananarivo, Manaus, Cape Town, Belém, which is in Brazil, Lima, Peru, Davao, Guatemala. And no, wrong. Perth, Antananarivo, Manaus, Cape Town, Belém, and Lima. That's it. Those 6. Every other city with over 1 million people in the world is at least 1,000 kilometers from another large city. Every other. And every other large city in the world has at least one route where high-speed rail makes sense, with these 6 exceptions. So, and here is a distribution plot of that, which makes it really clear that people have clustered pretty closely to we don't have very many cities that are truly standalone. Most of them are close to another city. Like here in the Northwest, Seattle is the biggest, but then Portland and Vancouver are about the same size. And we're all 3 of us together, we trade and travel between each other constantly. If you go to, as you see in the map, basically anywhere else in the world, you will always have at least one other city close to you which the high-speed rail would work. Even Denver in the middle of the country, 900 kilometers, it would work. Salt Lake City. Now you might end up with mountains in between, which might be a little challenging, but look at the Dwight D. Eisenhower Tunnel. Has that ever stopped us? And yeah, finishing up, here are Perth, Antananarivo, to Dar es Salaam, the basic top cities for each other. You see Belém and I think Manaus was also. Yeah, Belém and Manaus are close to each other, but they're still pretty far away. And finishing up, and this is the map of the 6 cities in the world: Lima, Belém and Manaus, Antananarivo, Cape Town, and Perth. They're all in the southern hemisphere, barely in that case. And they have, those are all the cities in the world where high-speed rail is not obviously viable. And I did this project because I like traveling sustainably. Flying is a lot more intensive per person in terms of carbon emissions, and it's more expensive, and airports cannot have nearly the same frequency of flights, which drives the price up through just lack of supply. And also having high-speed rail to compete with flying for shorter distances means we need fewer flights, and also means more people can travel where they want to go affordably and more environmentally friendly way. So that it's a really good way to marry both equality issues with environmental issues, and make it so the economy grows. It's one of the best ways to do that. And I feel like this has proven that basically everywhere in the world can profit from good quality passenger rail links to other major cities. So I hope you enjoyed this. I hope it gave you a different way of looking at the world, and I hope that you have a lovely day.